Hello, Realtors. Byron King, General Counsel, South Carolina Association of Realtors. Mike Christ is in the production facility. Tiara Pitts, Esquire, is here. Tiara, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tiara Pitts, your Director of Fair Housing and a member of the SCR Legal Team.
Super. And today we have a special guest star from the Grand Strand. Renny, please introduce yourself to the Realtors.
Hi, Renny Diedrich, RE/MAX Southern Shores and RE/MAX Professionals in Myrtle Beach, Florence, and Charleston. I am currently a member of the SCR Executive Team and Board of Directors, NAR Board of Directors, and a past president of the Coastal Carolina Association of Realtors.
Thanks. We appreciate you being involved in your leadership always. A reminder for the hotline, you can reach the hotline with any legal questions at 803-712-3478. You can email me, Byron at screaltors.org, Tiara at tpitts@screaltors.org, and Austin at screaltors.org as well. And Renny, you were talking about how you were involved. Kind of what we wanted to do is talk about, because you're a broker, we wanted to kind of get your perspective because we're staff and attorneys. One thing we want to talk about, September is Safety Month, like the Forewarn app. I know you're a big fan of Forewarn. How do you use it with your office, and any testimonials from some of your agents?
So I was actually fortunate enough to be on the committee chair, when we were deciding if we were going to actually go with the Forewarn app for SCR. And I love this app. I was introduced to it at an NAR convention. And I thought it was fantastic. I feel like there's a lot of safety tips that NAR and SCR puts out, but it's always very reactive, kind of maybe once we're in a bad situation, steps to maybe get us out of that. Where I felt the Forewarn app really was something that we could do proactively. Our agents could check out the person that called in. As you know, we show a lot of vacant properties. And we are in that crazy business. We run out and show properties to people we have never met before. Not a great practice. And with this app, it allows our agents to check in and say, if the person really is, if they say their name is John Smith, they can check their phone number. Is it really John Smith? And maybe get a little intel about this person to see if, what they're telling you is truthful. It's a shame we have to do it, but it's unfortunately the world we live in. So I'm a huge advocate. I've heard a ton of agent testimonials about it. People are ecstatic that we are offering this as a member benefit, and I hope it continues. It has served us well even with the land scams, and I think that's something we're going to talk about a little later, that when people call up with these vacant land, to list, they're able to put that information into Forewarn just to see if it is the person that they say it is. So I love it. Biggest fan. So happy that we provide that as a member benefit.
Super. Yeah, and if you do have a testimonial, please get in touch with the hotline, because like Renny was talking about, this is a pilot program for funding. So the more realtors that call in and say, hey, this kept me out of harm's way with this fake seller, with a scam, or even this person with a criminal background. And you're going to do this as part of your overall safety policy. But let us know your testimonials, because that can help us get funding going forward when it comes up from a renewal for more funding. Gerald, on the hotline, what are some things you're hearing about safety and Forewarn?
Yeah, definitely it's been helping with the vacant land scams, as you mentioned, which if you're not familiar with that, it's when a person will call to list a property that they're actually not the owner of, and it's normally a vacant land or just vacant home where the real owner either is living in another state or maybe living somewhere else where they're not visiting that property daily, and that person then goes through all of the process and tries to basically get that compensation and not really sell the home because they don't have the right to sell the home. So this has been stopping people from getting scammed, essentially, and stopping it, because sometimes this goes all the way to the closing table. And at that point, once funds are transferred, we're into a whole, a lot of things to try to get that money back. So I feel like it's been very helpful with people in reference to that, which is one of our biggest scams that's been going on.
Proactive. That's my one thing that I love about it. It's very proactive.
Yes.
Puts the agent in the driver's seat and hopefully not get themselves into a situation that they ought not be in.
And do you guys deal with a lot of the vacant land scams where you live?
Yes, we've had several in our office. One of them got to right before the closing table. It got to the point where the fake seller was communicating with the attorney and basically said if the attorney wouldn't wire the funds, they weren't going to sign the documents. There was kind of like some red flags all along, but that was clearly, and the attorney's like, I'm not wiring it. But we've had several since then. that have just popped up and it's one that actually has been hit like 3 times. This one piece of land has been hit like 3 different times. We were one of the companies that were called, and my agent was very, asked a lot of great questions and just knew that something was wrong, and basically asked for more information. The seller wouldn't provide it, and never heard from them again. And my agent actually watched it on the MLS and saw that it popped up on the MLS again, and reached out to that listing agent saying, this isn't real, this isn't a real seller. And sure enough, it wasn't.
So what are some red flags that people can be looking out for with these fake sellers? Like, what's something that could stand out as maybe not potentially being a real seller?
So one thing is we ask for driver's license. Like if they're only going to communicate with you on the phone. We had one that would only do text messages. It's like if you're not able to have a conversation, I get that you probably don't live here, and that's not uncommon in our market area. But if you're only willing to have a conversation, he would only email back and forth with the attorney. So we knew, like, why? This attorney you hired to represent you, why wouldn't you communicate with them the way you should? So there was just I'm a true believer in your gut. Mm-hmm. Your gut usually tells you, like, wow, there's something not right about this. And if you keep asking questions, you tend to ferret out that perhaps this isn't real. In one of the situations, like, this person had hacked into a medical facility and got the person's driver's license, social security, knew all the information about this seller. So no matter what we asked, they knew. But again, it was all because the attorney would not wire the proceeds. And thankfully so.
Right.
Thankfully.
Yes. I'm glad that worked out for you guys.
Yes. And, so my biggest thing is, okay, we got ourselves into this. How can we protect ourselves from not getting into this again? People always have nefarious reasons. What can we do to protect ourselves and protect these vacant sellers that aren't around here? And the only thing that I could come up is you got to go old school and mail a letter. Send a letter in the mail to the seller that's on the tax records. And, if it's the real seller, they're not going to be offended that they got a letter from you. 99% of the time, it's the actual real seller that has no idea that someone has purported to be them and tried to sell their property.
And that's where we first heard about it, was Hilton Head and Grand Strand, where it's the neighbors don't know each other, it's vacant, it's high value land. So when an innocent listing agent puts a sign there, the neighbors, they're selling the property. So like you said, get on courthouse retrieval through your MLS or old school tax records, mail a letter to the, because you're trying to find out if the seller's real or not.
Right.
They can spoof phone numbers, have fake emails. The forewarn, you can look them up and get phone numbers and addresses to help determine. The other thing I thought of is even calling the HOA sometimes. The HOA might have some or another point of contact.
That's a great idea.
To try to detect a fake seller. And then with forewarn, with safety, what are some things you tell your agents, not so much about fake SAMs, but say somebody's trying to lure somebody, to male or female, to assault them or rob them. What are some things that your agents do to try to deter that?
So if it's, first of all, we should meet the person in the office, meet the person that you're meeting. That if they called you on the phone, don't just go show them vacant property. Start to ask those questions, get some documentation, and verify that you are dealing with a person, hopefully, that doesn't have bad intentions. But it is, again, I feel like most people, your gut tells you something is wrong. Bring someone with you, make sure someone knows where you're going to be, have something where you can alert someone if something feels wrong. So we just try to keep that in front of their mind. We're not here to scare anyone, but we're also here to protect people. You want to take care of clients, but you also have to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah, exactly. So forewarn, it's not perfect because it's a database, so
Correct.
It's not 100%, so it's part of your overall safety protocols. But it does give you kind of an instant background check.
Correct.
You can see, somebody shows up kidnapping or armed robbery.
Or record not found.
Right.
If you put in a phone number and it says record not found, to me that would raise a red flag. That's interesting. Not that it would be the end all be all, but to your point, if it is in there and you do see some criminal record of them, well, make sure that you have a buddy with you and, play it smart.
That's a good point. And then even open houses, get the neighbors involved, take a colleague. And Tara always brings up, she's director of fair housing. What are some things with forewarn about uniformly using it with people to avoid fair housing issues too?
Yeah, with brokerages, you want to make sure you're using it all the same way. So if you're looking people up before you go show them a house, that's perfectly fine. But you want to make sure all of your agents are doing that and not just, looking them up in certain situations, because then it could be looked at as discriminatory if it's not used uniformly. So that's one thing. And also with the criminal conviction, sometimes you have to weigh it. Like if it's, something minor that was 20 years ago versus something violent that was in the last 5 years, you're weighing those safety concerns with also the right for people to be able to buy and sell real estate. So safety is, of course, your number one concern, but you want to weigh everything and make sure you're giving people a fair opportunity and not judging them outright.
And then kind of related to safety, we're coming up October 16th to the 19th. We'll be in Savannah with, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. A lot of people. It should be a great conference. Please attend. Renny, you've been to some of these conferences. What would you say to realtors that are kind of on the fence, should I go or not go? What would you say some benefits to going to some of these SCR or NAR events?
I think it's a great opportunity. It gets you exposure to not only other people to network with, but it gives you exposure to other ideas. Like I feel like sometimes things we're last to get some of the ideas here. And so when you can be around other people and you can hear different ways of doing business, like that's what I love. Like there's no one perfect way to do things. And it's just nice to hear from other people. They always have great speakers. Again, to maybe put light on something that you don't think about or you don't deal with. And I feel like a lot of things come from the West Coast that they trickle here. So let's know about it ahead of time and start making a plan of action how we can put it to practice in our business.
Fantastic. And Tiara, you've been on board a few years. What are some of your thoughts about meetings? What have you learned because you go to even different, you go to Arello, not Arello, but you go to NARAB and some other events. What are some events that you attend and what are some pros of going to those events?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to attend the multicultural conferences this year and as part of our DEI initiatives, and it's really good to just see what's going on in different cultures. For example, I am going to the Hispanic conference, which is at the end of the month, and Hispanic homebuyers are the largest growing minority class of homebuyers, which to me, business-wise, because everyone's, always focused on the business, that means they're going to need realtors. They're going to need agents to represent them as they're coming into these markets. So it's an opportunity to network, and if you're an agent, to get that business, to expand into a different market, but to also learn the different cultural competencies that make you a good agent for different communities, especially traditionally underserved communities. It just gives you more knowledge about how to navigate that. So, and the networking meeting, NAR often sends their some high-level people to the event. So you still get that networking aspect within our organization, but it's branching out to working with these other organizations and collabing and looking for opportunities to use grants or have first-time home buyers events. It's just a better way to reach even more people and to bring them into the realtor side as well.
Super. And then you had some exciting news from the DEI committee about the Spanish explanation forms. Let me give a brief on that, please.
Yes. So we this year we launched the Spanish forms translations for some of our most popular forms, and that's just to be a companion document, all in Spanish of direct translation of our English forms, because of the fact that Spanish speakers are a big growing class of home buyers, and we want to just make things inclusive. And of course, that's just the first language that we started with, but we don't want to end there. We want to just be as inclusive as possible and be able to service different communities and have them have their legal documents in a language that they read and write in.
Fantastic. And if you need training on harassment or safety, the SCR lawyers, Tiara, can come do training either live, in person, or via Zoom. Same with Austin, same with myself. And we can talk about safety at these big meetings, big cities, stay in groups. And then like harassment, you want to treat other people respectfully. It's a professional event, behave professionally, golden rule. But also, if you see something, maybe try to intervene or get in touch with one of the leaders like Renny or a staff person like me or Tiara, Nick or Austin to try to intervene and take care of some issues before they accelerate. Terry, you've been involved with like harassment policy. What are some kind of a briefing on our harassment policy that you give when you give these trainings?
Yeah, so we have a code of conduct harassment policy at SCR events, and this is to protect realtors, staff, people who attend our events, such as speakers. We want everyone to feel safe and really feel welcomed and not to be put in situations where they're harassed or intimidated, or even some of the language that's used when someone could think it's funny when it could really be offending someone and making them feel uncomfortable. So that policy is put in place for different forms of harassment, including sexual harassment, which is a form that's common at some of events that people go to, because of course it is events, we're all adults, but you still have to keep it professional and know your role for being here, which is business related and making sure that people are feeling safe. So those policies are put in place for that, and we do have a process by which we can handle harassment complaints based on that code of conduct policy. And of course, like Renny was saying earlier, we would prefer for things to not happen, but when they do happen, we want you to know that we have policies in place to help address these things.
And Renny, you talk about harassment. What if your agent comes to you and they said, "Oh, this buyer was, vulgar or harassed me," or a seller with consumers? What are some things you tell your agents when consumers are not behaving?
So we actually had a situation with that. If someone is upset, I tried to get in the middle and ferret it out between the agent and the consumer, whether it's the buyer or seller. And we actually had a situation where it was a buyer. And I just thought sometimes it just wasn't a connection between the agent and the consumer. That happens. Not everyone loves me. They may prefer Tiara over me. That's fine. And so usually I think it starts off that way. But in this situation, when I called and I got to the bottom of it, the person was pretty forceful with me, but it doesn't matter. Like, to me, it rolls off my back. I'm okay with that. And then when I spoke with my agent was very clear that they wouldn't be working with this person, which this person doesn't normally act that way or talk that way or just, that determined, and shared with me some of the messages that they got. And they were so vulgar and so awful, because normally I would just say maybe it just needs to be referred to someone else, another agent. And when I read the messages, it wasn't going to be a match with anyone. And so I just politely told the consumer that this isn't a great fit. There's a lot of great companies in our market. You can conduct business with those. It just wasn't a great fit for us. There was no coming back. You try to bridge the gap as best as you can, but there's just some things that one cannot.
That's a good point, because a lot of times I think people say, "Oh, these rules, why are they coming?" And you would be shocked to see some of the messages, like you just mentioned, that me and Tara and Austin and Nick see. It would shock your conscience to see some of these. So these rules, unfortunately, are necessary. Mm-hmm. Like Tara said, we have a policy to handle it. And on the hotline, we always say, "Hey, always talk to your broker in charge." That's one of the things we always tell them. And then we're in kind of your wheelhouse, Renny, Forms Committee. Kind of talk about your background with the Forms Committee and what the Forms Committee does for the association and for the membership at large across the state.
So I was the committee chair of the Forms Committee for years. I'm not sure how many years. This year I am participating as a member, and I love forms. I am the odd duck. I'm in good company with you guys. Mm-hmm. You guys love forms too. So I was fortunate to be asked to be on the committee, and there's a lot that's involved. And I had no idea before I was on the committee what was involved. I mean, usually it comes from other members about changes they would like to see, or like, for example, we just did the buyer agency. We had to make a change on the buyer agency because of the code of ethics saying you cannot say your services are free unless you're getting no compensation. So that form change was pretty easy, but there are some form changes that are not. Like when we switched the contract from repair procedure to due diligence, that was like a 1.5 to 2 year discussion. We went back and forth, and I can tell you there's probably about 10 to 12 of us on the committee, and nothing ever goes yay or nay. There is a lot of discussion back and forth, and what about this, and what about this? Have you thought about this? Or I see a problem with this and this is why. There's a lot of discussion. These meetings are intense in the fact that because there is so much discussion, it's not ever just other than the buyer agency, which we still went back and forth on that one too, you're trying to make sure that you're encompassing everyone's opinion to make sure you put the best form for the entire state. This form covers the entire state, so we can't say we need to make this change because it affects my market, or we're going to do this because it affects that market. We try to, when we make changes, it really has to affect the entire state, be a benefit for the entire state to make a change. And we simply don't make changes just to make changes. We try to, based on calls, like Austin is our SCR liaison, so that's another thing. It is all practitioners. We have one liaison, and that's Austin. And so it's not like Austin saying, you must do this, or Byron saying, you must do this. It's not any of that. But Austin and Byron and Tiara put their input in, like, hey, these are the calls that we're getting on the legal hotline. And if it's something in our forms that need to address that so we can decrease the number of calls on the legal hotline, that comes into play as well, too. But it is normally members that submit the information to their local association. The local association passes it up to the state, and it's stuff we look at. There's some things that people are totally passionate about, and the committee's like, we don't think that will be the best decision for the whole state. It may be for this one unique situation, but it has to solve a bigger problem, I guess, is how we look at it.
That's a good point, because I tell people on the hotline, I could write it favoring the seller or the buyer, and so we try to find that sweet spot in the middle where if they were both negotiating where it would end up, that it would help with that. And I tell them also, like, the base contract, the 310, it's really for a residential resale, kind of a cookie cutter transaction. Once you get outside that, you probably want to get your attorneys involved. A lot of times your closing attorneys will be happy to help you with language if you need that too. And one thing I took a note of when you're talking about the buyer agency agreement, where there's about a third of the states that have buyer agency agreements. And you've all read, or maybe you can go Google it after this, the class action lawsuits that are going on out in the Midwest right now in Missouri and Illinois involving some large brokerages in NAR. And like the ethics change where you weren't supposed to talk about doing it for free. And buyer agents bring a lot of value to the table. So I think one thing on the hotline, kind of the pushback, they had never had that conversation. They weren't trained. Are you training your agents how to have that conversation if you're a buyer agent? What are some things you bring up for the buyer agents to promote their value in the transaction?
So as a broker in charge, like, I feel it is my responsibility to educate my agents on the form changes. I'm fortunate enough to be on the forms committee, but even if I wasn't, and there was a period of time I wasn't, anytime I knew about a forms change, it is my job to educate my agents. SCR does a phenomenal job of getting that information out, but I also feel like they need to hear it more than once. So it's important for them to know the change, why the change was made, brainstorm ideas of how we can discuss it. And to me, the buyer agency form change is really about articulating your value proposition. And so we have been talking in our company probably for the last 6 to 8 months to last year about, okay, think about what is your value? What do you do to earn your compensation? What do you do different than maybe other agents do? Not cutting down your competition, but knowing what value you bring. Always remembering, like, back in the day, what's your elevator speech? And so it's just really understanding, educating the consumer. We feel everyone knows what we do. We feel like everyone knows how we get paid. We feel like everyone understands. Well, no, they don't. We do this every day. They don't. So we need to help them. And even if they've bought or sold in a different state, our state is very different. As you know, every state has different laws, and we need to educate them on how business is done here, what the laws dictate that we do, and what we can't do. So to me, our job as a realtor is to educate our client, not just assume they know what we do.
That's a great point. That's a good, NAR, value of your membership. NAR is fighting for your value as the buyer agent. Some of these trial lawyers would like to see buyer agents only get paid by the buyer, and a lot of first-time home buyers can't afford that, and it's the biggest transaction in their lives. So really, long-term, what these plaintiffs and trial lawyers are doing could be harmful to first-time home buyers, because there is a lot of value to have representation in the largest transaction.
You need someone to explain the forms. That's always been my biggest question about these lawsuits. It's like, we're supposed to help everyone. We're supposed to protect the public, but if for some reason, you're not able to get money, are you saying that these people that can't afford it don't deserve it and don't need it? Like, I would say, to the contrary, they need someone to advocate for them. They need someone to explain the forms, help them, educate them, clearly they have their attorney, but by then the contract is already done. They need someone to help them.
Super. And then you mentioned the due diligence. What are some things that you train your agents that were used to the repair procedure, and we went to due diligence? The lawyers love due diligence because it's kind of clean, but I understand the realtors, it was a big change, and maybe there was a perspective that repair procedure kind of boxed the seller in, but really on the hotline we were getting calls where buyers were negotiating outside repair procedure. What are some things that you talk about in your sales meetings about due diligence pros that you like about it?
So not all of my agents loved due diligence. I love it. So when it got rolled out, I was happy because I got asked all the time under repair procedure, does the seller have to do this? Or can my buyer ask for this? And I felt like I had to be the judge, and I'm not the judge. I'm not an attorney, and I didn't draft this contract. So I feel like it's easier. I don't think it's an advantage to either party. Like you had talked about, when a form is done, we want it to be neutral for both buyer and seller. And I feel like this change makes both people negotiate it and doesn't box the buyer in. I feel like there was times in repair procedure that the buyer felt like they had to buy even though they didn't want to buy. So I feel like this gives people that opportunity, the buyer, if they're not 100% happy, and we understand that not all sellers come to the table and negotiate, gives them that opportunity to say, you know what, this is the largest purchase I'm going to make. I am not comfortable with how the negotiations went or didn't go, and it gives me the opportunity to pay money if that's how the contract was negotiated or not, and get out and find a house that would better serve my needs. So it is making sure that you know when your deadline. To me, that is the number one thing that I hammer home to my agent. Know when your deadline is. Okay, if you're going to negotiate and use the repair addendum, make sure that's 2 to 3 days before your due diligence deadline, so your buyer has chance to marinate on it and figure out, yes, I'm okay with it, or no, I'm not, and then also has time to get that money to the seller if in fact there is a fee that is due. That's like the biggest thing, because a lot of people will say, oh, I just have to give notice. My deadline's today. I just have to give the notice today. I'm like, no, you need to give notice, and the fee has to be paid by the date, by 6 p.m. And a lot of people just think, well, I've given notice and that's all I need to do. And so I feel like those are the 2 points that come up a lot.
That's a good point too, because you're talking about buyer agents and their value proposition. That'd be part of your elevator speech. Here's what I'm going to do during due diligence. I'm going to make sure we're calendared out. Because like you said, you've got a due diligence period, but really you need to make sure the buyer's getting their inspections, leaving time to negotiate, and leave time to terminate too. Jared, what are some hotlines you're getting on due diligence?
Yeah, so sometimes people feel like it just favors the buyer and the buyer can just walk away, which they can, but they have to properly terminate, they would have to pay that fee. And I think that's getting, lost in translation, that the buyer can just give the notice of termination without the termination fee. If that is done, they are not properly terminated under due diligence. So I think understanding that, and that your seller does have rights and does have legal actions, breach of contract, things that they could explore with their attorney if the buyer were to improperly terminate the contract. Another thing is not having enough time, like you were mentioning, Byron. Sometimes they say, well, the seller never responded, so the seller has to act, when really everything is laid out in the contract. Everyone knows these deadlines. So if the seller were to not respond to a request, the buyer still is under that obligation to either terminate or continue with the contract regardless of any inaction, maybe by the seller. Of course, we want all parties to communicate with each other. We don't want you to wait till that 6 o'clock and then call them and say, oh, well, we want you to communicate and know what's going on prior to the deadline, whether that person's going to go forward or they're going to properly terminate or improperly terminate. I always want the communication, but still, if a party has to act based on the contract, they need to act. They can't wait on, the other party.
I always said, no response is a response.
I love that.
No response is a response.
Yes.
So they didn't respond, that is their response. You have to, if they're going to do nothing, and you got to make your decision based on that.
And also, we also get calls about maybe something wasn't disclosed, so now the buyer feels like, oh, I don't have to pay the termination fee, when it's not set up for that.
Correct.
The buyer would still need to pay that termination fee, and if it's any breaches based on non-disclosure or any other legal remedies that they can go after the seller for, that would be separate from properly terminating. Two rights don't make a wrong, so you want to make sure you're still doing things by the book and correct.
Super. And then kind of what we do is kind of have a little breaks when we're talking about this. So we're going about the license plate. Tara, you want to talk about the license plates, please?
Yes, we at the DMV they offer this license plate tag which says home ownership, the American dream, and it goes into a fund where we're in charge of each purchase of this license plate. About $100 goes into a grant fund, which then we're allowed to designate that back to Habitat for Humanities that use it on new construction projects. This is a part of, wanting more construction, the housing inventory shortage, things that are common problems all across the country. This is just one way that we're helping work on that. So each year those grants, all of the money that's accumulated from the purchase of the license plate is then dispersed to Habitat for Humanities who apply for the grant and are using it based on new constructions. Typically, it depends on the amount, but typically everyone who applies and is qualified is able to receive that grant, and the total amount of the fund will be split evenly between the applicants. So this is just a little something that we do to help in partnership with the state and the DMV. So we encourage you guys to buy this license plate, especially as Realtors. And it does have the Realtor R. So this is another way to brand yourself and to show, who you are. Someone might see your car at Target or something and then want to, that could be a way to generate business by having that branding. So, and it supports a good cause. And that will be launching very soon, probably this month, and the applications will be due November 1st so that we're able to give that money out this year, and then next year we'll do it again.
Fantastic. Yeah, and Renny, one thing we're excited about you being here, we can talk to you about how things work in the real world, in the marketplace. So one thing we're always curious about, how do you train your agents, like a new agent or even an experienced agent? What are some things you do in your brokerage to make sure people stay up with the news and information?
So for brand new agents, we have a director of agent development that teaches them the forms, teaches them the systems, teaches them what they need to know to be a realtor. But as things change, that affects everyone. And so we do meetings, and so everything is rolled out in a meeting. We actually have a meeting, an all-company meeting next week, which we'll be rolling out all the new form changes. We'll go through them, have them screenshotted so they can know what it is. But it is consistent. Like there's, I maybe send out a video or an email, and then we kind of try to follow it up with a meeting. Just again, sometimes people, as we know, don't see it the first time. But again, it's super important that our agents know it's their job to know what changes happen in the industry. SCR always sends out emails, our local association does, but sometimes they just too quick with the delete to make sure they understand. It's their job to know.
Super. And if you want to watch some of our videos, we got the SC Realtors YouTube channel. Mike has posted those. Sharon has links to those in our weekly e-newsletter. You can go back and watch those videos. And even our high volume watches are 4,000 views. We got 30,000 realtors, so 4,000, that means what, 26,000 people aren't watching the videos. So just repeating the message over and over, right. That's a great point.
And as brokerages, you are allowed to, one of your member benefits is having one of the attorneys join in on these team meetings, whether that's on Zoom or if, the schedules permit, coming to one of the larger meetings where we can talk to you guys about form changes or ethics or harassment training. Because sometimes, you as the broker, if you do, they may, when they keep hearing it, even if they just only hear it from us or only hear it from you guys, it can be tuned out. So it's good to mix it up where that information comes from, a different voice, same information, but different voices.
Awesome.
Super. And then policy. So we offer a long policy that can be edited for the brokerage and kind of a short PDF policy that complies with license law where it's just check boxes. So Renny, with like policies, like your brokerage policy, how do you implement that in your shop?
So anytime someone joins our company, we supply them with a copy of the policy manual, which they sign. That's part of their onboarding. As we make changes, those are disclosed to them to let them know, hey, this is what changed. Don't necessarily have them re-sign anything, but let them know so they stay up to date on what has changed and why it's changed. I typically try to update our policy manual yearly, usually just minor tweaks here and there, but You know, when we have new form changes or a new form that's implemented that we really want people to use, clearly we make sure that that edit is in there so everyone knows.
That's good that you guys update it yearly, because sometimes we get calls on the hotline where a policy hasn't been updated in a very long time. And of course, things evolve, things change. I know earlier we were talking and you mentioned making sure your policies comply with the new laws and the new forms changes, because everything has to go together. So, you know, sometimes you won't have to update it because nothing will change. But if there's been a big change to something that affects our industry, then it's important to review those policies. Or if something comes up, if you see a behavior that you didn't put in the policy before, that you're like, oh, I don't, you know, necessarily want to conduct business that way, you're allowed to update that as the broker and just make sure that everyone is aware of those changes.
Right.
Super, and then kind of shifting gears to insurance. So we'll have September 21st at noon, we'll have the South Carolina Director, Department of Insurance on a webinar. Please tune in that and ask questions. Renny, what are some insurance issues you're seeing in the marketplace right now?
We have quite a bit in our market. Insurance is hard to come by. A lot of insurance providers have gotten out of our state. The ones that have are trying to recoup all of their losses from our hurricanes and different payouts that they've done throughout the United States. I, for one, my husband and I own an investment property, and it's on the ocean. It's a beachfront condo, and our policy last year for the whole condo, not just us personally, was $400,000, which I thought was a lot to begin with. It's 320 units or something of that sort. And this year, when we renewed, we were told that we should be happy. I use happy because it went from $400,000 to $2.1 million, which is the annual premium, which is a lot. So that was quite jaw-dropping because of, you know, claims and being close to the ocean. But it's not just by the ocean; it's affecting our market tremendously. And again, I worry about affordable housing for people that can't afford these insurance assessments, all these HOAs. We have a lot of HOAs in our market, and the HOA are just stewards of our money, of the owner's money. There's not like a separate entity out there, so they're having to assess owners to make up the shortfall that they've had in their budget, because they certainly wouldn't have budgeted for the increase they had. So that's really important. Like, we're talking to our agents about making sure when they're working with buyers that they talk to their insurance agent right away. If you didn't do it before you write the offer, which probably most people don't, do it within their due diligence period, because some people are getting insurance quotes that are way higher than they expected. To be proactive, just letting them know that this is a problem. We need to make sure that you're aware and that you feel comfortable and you can afford the payment. Let's be honest. We got to make sure that they can afford what they want to buy. So there's a lot of that. We're also having issues with lenders not being able to get the master policies aren't saying what it needs to say. So we have lenders that aren't being able to lend because of insurance issues in the master deed. So we've kind of got twofold.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things we've been seeing is, if you watch in the national news, some insurance companies are refusing to write new policies in certain areas of the United States. So availability. So the Forms Committee created kind of the flood insurance document that basically says, like you said, you know, shop around, shop early, do it during due diligence so you can get out if you can't afford it. And it says, hey, availability and cost are going to go up in the future, most likely. And another thing we heard, you know, you were talking about the HOA with a large insurance. What we're hearing about is, because it's such a large increase, sometimes that assessment will be paid over years. So Forms Committee's been working on a form to try to handle that. Tiara, what are some insurance issues you hear on the hotline in your experience?
One that has to do with fair housing is with someone that has an emotional support animal, and maybe an HOA or insurance company has breed restrictions on the type of animals that can be at that property and that they will provide insurance for. So with that, if it is a emotional support animal or a service animal that is federally protected under those federal fair housing laws, as well as state and local laws, so it wouldn't be, as long as, you know, of course, everything is documented in the way that needs to be and is meeting all the prerequisites to be a ESA or service animal, then you cannot be denied just simply based on an insurance. And I just had this call recently where it was actually the HOA attempting to put a tenant out, and it was the property management company who was calling. But you're not allowed to just outright deny it based on those federal protections. So if that is happening, you can give us a call at the hotline and we can talk more about it. But it isn't just because the owner may have to get a different insurance or more expensive insurance in some cases, doesn't outright deny them from being able to, from that tenant from being able to have that animal.
Super. So that's all my topics, and you're kind of wrapping up, and I'll let y'all make your closing statement here in a second. But I want to promote, we have mediation class coming up October 23rd through the 25th. The 26th will be ombudsman training. That'll be with Stephanie Walker. Please contact the hotline if you're interested in becoming a mediator or ombudsman. And Renny, any kind of closing thoughts from the broker's perspective?
Just stay aware. Stay plugged in and stay aware and read your emails, and you'll find out what's going on so you can help your agents.
Fantastic. Tiara, any closing thoughts?
No, just contact the legal hotline with any questions, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and keep it safe, legal, and profitable. Mike, thanks for producing as always. We'll see you next time, Realtors.